students, undergraduate and graduate, received the survey, and about 13% of them responded. I'm told that the number is 3,907 students responded to the survey. So there's the low number. In relation to other AAU schools, the other 33 schools that participated, we were not the bottom of the pack, but we were pretty close to being the lowest participant.
Hi, I'm Kim Randall. I'm Director of Equal Opportunity and the Title IX Coordinator. So I come at this from two different perspectives. In my role in the Equal Opportunity Office, one of the things that I do is investigate complaints that students bring to us about university employees, and I also supervise 3 investigators who investigate those kinds of complaints as well as other kinds of discrimination and harassment complaints. So one of the things that I looked at when I saw the survey with that hat on was the number of complaints from, we did ask some specific questions about graduate students and their relationships with faculty. And on the one hand, I was pleased to see that the number of people reporting experiences of sexual harassment with faculty is relatively low, but there are some. And so that remains troublesome to me to think about how we can more effectively work with our employees to ensure that they understand the issues of boundaries, particularly with graduate students, particularly with teaching fellows, research assistants, where there are all these one-on-one situations that we get concerned about. So I think that's an area we need to look at a little more, understanding that while the number is low, any is too many. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is, as Title IX Coordinator, I also work with Ken and with a team of judicial affairs investigators to review complaints that are student on student or sometimes employee on student. They address complaints that come in against students. And we spend a lot of time talking about the impact of the events on our students, and we work with Maureen and her staff closely on that, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're concerned about that. We try to make sure our students get the kinds of support and help that they need. We also work closely with, sometimes with deans or faculty in colleges when students have experienced this sort of difficulty and they need their deans and their faculty to assist them and understand them. And we also talk a lot about appropriate responses and sanctioning in particular kinds of cases, and that's one of the things that I was pleased to see in this survey was that the number of students who are aware of resources seems to have risen, and the number of students who understand how to go about reporting seems to have risen. Again, we would like it if it was 100%. It isn't 100%, but it's certainly better than it's been in past years. And I think our experience with students when they come to see us in our office is more that they do already have, most of them, an understanding of what the policies and procedures are, not specifically, but sort of generically. They know where to go, they know who to talk to, and I think they're more willing than they have been, although Maureen, perhaps you can speak to this, to, particularly after receiving some support, to come forward and do that. So I think our reporting rates are up a bit, which is also a good thing. Maureen?
I'm Maureen Mahoney. I'm the director of the Sexual Assault Response and Prevention Center. And in that role, I looked at some of the results of the survey from 2 different lenses. One is that in terms of the clinical response, it seems as if students were more aware that our office exists. I also think, though, that one thing that students aren't aware of, given the name of our office, is that we also assist students who are in a relationship or have been in a relationship with an abusive or controlling person, students who have experienced any type of sexual harassment or sexual exploitation. I think the response rates about where to go for that were a little bit lower, and that's totally understandable because it's not mentioned really anywhere. I still think that there are a lot of confusion about whether or not graduate students, PhD students can use our services, which of course they can. I think the response rate, I also, in reading it, oftentimes we'll get calls from students or students come in saying that they want to report something, and our office is confidential. So like no one reports anything to us. we can give students what their options are given the situation that they're in. And I think oftentimes students are kind of relieved to have their options explained to them. On the prevention side, that one of the things that really stood out for me was that the bystander intervention questions, that students said that they would be able to identify a potentially hazardous situation, and that a pretty high percentage of students said that they've responded, which I think if you look at on the surface is rather heartening, but then when you dig down a little bit deeper, the gap between female students and LGBTQ students who were grouped together, and male students, the students that are most vulnerable, women and LGBTQ students, were the ones that responded the most, were the ones that said they were aware of, that they could spot a situation, they felt comfortable spotting a situation where that was potentially hazardous. Male students, no. And I think that, if you look at it through the lens of vulnerability, that someone who is vulnerable can probably spot someone who's in a similarly vulnerable situation.
I say we go right to people's questions and comments. How about that? Just raise your hand, I'll get a microphone over to you. Let's, part of why we're here is to talk a little bit and answer each other's questions and all that good stuff. So.
Ellen Taszewski, Associate Dean of Student Affairs at Wheelock. So just going back to the point that you made about the low response rate, so thinking about how to get more students to respond, what do you think attributes to the fact that there was such a low response rate? And is there a way, if we are going to do the survey again in the future, how we could get more individuals to participate?
I think it wasn't publicized well. That a lot of people didn't know it was happening, that there wasn't, if you look at research about what makes a successful climate survey, campus climate survey, there are schools that have done it successfully. And I think we really fell short on a lot of the points that are successful. That developing a hashtag, having a unified campaign so that it's easily recognizable. Also, I think having backup emails and contact from people that matter to students, not just from Westat, but from people's deans and depending on the school, advising offices, those kind of things, I think are really important.
I had a couple of other things. We were a bit constrained to fit into a time period that the other 33 schools had. And so I think the timing was really tough for us. We had a period of time where we had to start administering the survey. I think from an academic standpoint for us, it's a very important. We were doing this as close to the beginning of April as possible. That's just not a great academic time for people. I also think that there was a bit of confusion about the online sexual misconduct training education program, and people didn't quite always see the difference between the two in the survey. And I also think people are a bit surveyed out. People get a lot of surveys, sometimes big, large ones that we send out, but also people are getting surveyed for classes and other sorts of things as well. So I think a lot of factors contributed to it, and hopefully we can get a little bit more, in 2 years, a little bit more control over those timing elements that matter to us and might make a difference to us.
Ken, and I don't know if you want to mention the thinking that went into incentives and see if we can get any feedback on that issue.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened when we did this in 2015, and remember, that was a survey that we administered ourselves. We wrote the survey, we administered the survey, and something we got really good feedback from students on was what the incentive was. And here's what the incentive was. This time and in 2015, the incentive was at the end of the survey, you could make a $5 contribution. The school would make a $5 contribution. to one of 4 organizations that deal with sexual violence, dating, relationship violence, rape in the society, nonprofits, or you could elect not to do it at all. And then what we did was we would aggregate those dollars and we would give to that particular those particular organizations. We had done well by that in 2015, and we decided to go back with it again. And again, we got good feedback on that. The 33 schools that were a part of it, I think we were the only one that did that as an incentive for completing the survey. Everyone else did something on the magnitude of a certain amount of dollars amount for, say, a Starbucks coffee or an Amazon gift certificate or something of that matter. So, I mean, does that work anymore? Is our altruism a good enough incentive, or should we really be thinking about coming into the league of nations, if you will, with other schools and give people an incentive that's more monetary? Love to hear your thoughts.
No, one of the things that's, oh, go ahead.
I just thought there would be
Let me bring this microphone over to you.
that incentive sounds great. I would have thought they'd be lining up to do the survey in order to put their money kind of where their mouth is in terms of supporting some of these organizations. So I'm disappointed that we to people to take a survey.
We don't know if the survey, if an incentive matter that much either. I mean, there's a lot we don't know about the survey respondents.
Well, everybody's busy and you're making choices about how you spend your time, but if you could feel good about it, virtuous, that you were really good because I think that would be
We thought so, and in 2015 we thought so too.
Well, Harvard got, I believe Harvard got somewhere in the neighborhood of 35%, and they gave an Amazon gift card. So very good.
Hi, Michelle, I'm the Director of the Department of Social Advocacy for Undergraduate Student Government. And in regards to that, I am finally ingrained in the university community, and I had no idea that that incentive was there for the survey. I know that I personally didn't do the survey. I remember seeing an email from my area director, because I'm an RA on campus, but still just being a busy student, I didn't respond. And that's unfortunate, and that's my own fault, and I'm sorry that I didn't respond, but it was not publicized well enough. Students did not know about this survey. I probably only knew because I was reminded by my area director, and then again, still didn't take that initiative to do it. So if I'm a student that's finally ingrained in this university and I'm not responding, think about the students that you actually want to hear from, that are the ones that aren't responding. And then in regards to the training that we all have to do over the summer, again, I'm super involved and I know the resources on this campus. I was able to just mute the entire training and just click through it and finish it. So what about the students that need that training, need to see that information and are just muting it?
And as the emails, I'm the person who says we gotta stop doing this by email. I'm with Maureen, we gotta find other ways to get the word out to people about this.
And I think as long as there's only one way of training people, which is the online at this point, that, and I'm gonna backtrack a little bit and say, is it someone who does this work? No one comes to things like this willingly. Right, no one will say, oh good, I have another sexual misconduct prevention training that I have to do. No one says that, so it really needs to be required. And to use public health language, what has proven successful is dosages and different ways, because people learn different ways. They learn in different ways and have different styles. So an online training, an in-person training that focuses on different things is what has been proven to be more successful than okay, one and done. Because people will, knowing that it's one and done, if you can mute it, which I didn't think you could mute it, but
Shouldn't be able to, but I guess they figured it out.
yeah.
I know some of our faculty figured it out too.
I have a question back to student government. I mean, something that would be really interesting for me to understand is would student government be interested in really being part of the outreach? Because, we're the administrators or say, sort of do this or we want you to, that to me, part of this is for students really to understand their own community and have a voice. And so it seems like if there were some level of peer pressure to participate, you know, where it was seen to be very pro-social, it would be incredibly helpful. And so I don't know if that's doable, but
Yeah,
it'd be great. Yeah.
And I think that's what the research that I've read about successful climate surveys shows, to get different groups, you know, an athletic team, student government, you know, different people who, you know, work on campus for work study, and really be able to mobilize the student leaders that other students listen to and look up to.
I mean, you know, all that being said, I don't think we have any reason to doubt the validity of, you know, the information that came back. It is fairly in line with the responses in the other 33 universities. You know, something we were talking about is you know, no matter what the percentage is, whether it's 13 or 35, you know, just because we're in line doesn't mean it's necessarily representative of the community, because you could get the same, you know, bias in the responses in terms of who decides to participate from anywhere else. You know, again, on the other hand, even though our participation was lower, we are not at all an outlier, so I don't think any of us are doubting the validity of, you know, the information that came back. It's just, it would be nicer to, you know, be closer to 20%. But I don't think, we don't want to spend too much time, you know, worrying about that. We're still going to use this survey to inform steps that the university should take. So.
Yeah, our researchers say that we've got plenty of information to work off of.
Yes, absolutely.
But you know, it does push that question, you know, is this something that people are still deeply interested in, committed to, wanting to make sure that they're engaged in? I think I have an answer to that, but you know, that's that other question we want, especially where, and Erica can fill in this, but there's legislation that's local about surveying and getting a certain voice into some of these conversations. We will probably, it's likely, we'll do this survey again in 2 years, and you know, we will have all kinds of pressures, both internal and external, to try and make sure that we get more voices into this conversation, and to try and ascertain whether or not this is really important for the community to continue to engage in at a high level. So, you know, that question is still out there, especially when we're in such a data-driven world.
And then just on top of that, like the survey results were released yesterday, and this event is today. Like, I mean, I have 2 midterms tomorrow, and I'm extremely stressed being here right now, and I'm only really here because like I have to be for my position, and I need this information to give it back to the student bodies. Like, how many students are really here right now? Like, this is absolutely, like, this is disappointing to not see this many students here. I brought up the fact that I was attending this event to so many of my peers, and no one knew about it. No one saw the results of the report. Like, nothing's being publicized, and it's like, it's extremely angering just to like not see students knowing that all this is happening. Like,
I wish we had waited to.
Yeah.
By the way, this is just the BU report. The big report's about 1,000 or so pages, so, and I'm still trying to get through it. So
yeah, I mean, even the summary, it's just like, this should be a BU Today article. This should
It
be.
is.
Okay,
Yes.
great. I missed it. Sorry, my fault. But like the provost emails, those are just so easy to glance over. It needs to be, as you mentioned, things like coming from student government. I wish we would have known about this ahead of time, because of course you've been compiling this report for months. I'm assuming like this is something that you could be collaborating with student groups on, instead of it just coming from the administration. We're your greatest tool in speaking to the students. You should be using us.
Brother Larry Whitney, University Chaplain for Community Life at Marsh Chapel. One of the things in attempting to get through at least part of the report that came out clearly is that there's an enormous amount of statistical data in the report, which is great. but the report never seems to draw conclusions. So I'm interested in your perspective on the panel as to what is the climate on our campus with regards to sexual misconduct, and what are we going to do to improve it, assuming that the tone of the provost's email, which indicates that we're not where we want to be, is indicative of where we're all at. So I'm hoping to broaden that conversation from the very narrow question of improving participation, which is all well and good, but where are we actually and where are we going from here?
Maureen, do you want to start? Someone who lives and breathes this.
Right. I'm not sure, Larry. I'm not sure. I agree that we're not where I'd like us to be, and I'm not really sure how to get us there.
You know, there was an article in the Globe today that talked about the 3 schools in the Boston area that participated in this, BU, MIT, and Harvard. You know, first off, it made me think, and I've known this intuitively, but it made me think that this is a Boston issue, and we've got to start looking at Boston solutions to this. This is, I don't know, I find very few students stay solely on our campus. You know, a lot of the way that people interact with each other is throughout this city itself, and there are a lot of people in this city who would be people we call students. So, you know, that was one of the things that I thought about as I think about your comment. And so I wonder if we need to think about how I'm talking about everybody in this room, we pull together as a larger Boston community to think a little bit about this. You know, the other thing too, and this got me a bit too in the article that I read, they talked about how Harvard, since they did the survey starting back in 2015 till now, they've taken tremendous efforts over time, and then the reporter just squashed my soul by saying, in essence, not a lot's changed. They haven't moved the needle very much. And so that was, for me, the thing that crushed me a little bit, that would be the case, that tremendous effort. And so I said, well, maybe the tremendous effort can't just be at Harvard, can't just be at BU, can't just be at MIT. Maybe the tremendous effort has to be more joint, and it has to be a much wider look. So, you know, there's a little bit more to add to Maureen's point.
I actually think we have different climates in different parts of our community, and I think that's one of the difficult things to wrap our arms around, really. I have spoken to some faculty who have told me that their students in their classes are incredibly engaged in this topic and really involved in thinking through how we can address it. And then I think there are other segments of the community that just really aren't aware of the issues at all. So I hesitate to look at the BU community as just one big melting pot of people. I think we have to look more carefully at communities within this community to figure out what's the best approach for the wide variety of different groups of folks that we have here.
I don't have a title, I'm just a sophomore here.
That's good enough.
I have a couple comments. One is that I also didn't know about the survey that went out. I think it would be helpful if it came from like our advisors, because I think students are definitely going to open those emails as opposed to like ones from the provost. Sorry.
You would open your email to students, wouldn't you?
Sorry.
You wouldn't delete me, would you? Yeah, you
So sorry. And I also just think that there's something to be said about how women and the LGBTQ community are the most vulnerable, and yet everyone here that's involved in this issue, you're all women. And it's not to say that you're incapable or that like all men are the issue, but I think that there's something to be said about how maybe having a man involved would be able to reach the male population a little more. Sorry.
I'm pretty involved with this implementation group and this survey group and all that sort of stuff.
Actually, we have several men on the board.
Yeah. We were just at the medical campus, and we had a few of our researchers who were, I think, call themselves men who were part of it as well.
I think I've just never seen them. Like even at orientation when there was like the whole SART course, I only saw women leading it, all the things I've been to with like FY 101, it was always women, like female students involved in the group and female leaders, like adults.
Yeah, I mean, we have graduate student employees that do the FY 101, and this year, not a single male applied. We have one undergraduate soccer ambassador who's male. He was an ambassador last year and was this year, and tried to talk some of his friends and fraternity brothers into doing it. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. We really look for men to be involved. But it's interesting, we have one male staff person in my office, and when I hired him a few years ago, people said to me, "Why are you hiring a guy?"
It's tricky. It's really tricky, that sort of thing. I mean, you raise a very important point.
Yeah.
But I think you can also get plenty of people say on all sides that why are you hiring them, and then also why you getting involved in something. You take your seat and you sit in the back and you be supportive. I mean, so there's a lot of conversation that goes on about this.
But I think that once again, I'm going to go back to research and best practices, is that, I mean, ideally, our Step Up, Step In BU would have a male-identified and female-identified facilitator. That's what it was designed to do. But we don't have the males that are interested in doing it. But and to go back to research, that there are a lot of best practices that really show that men listen to men.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if you know any guys who might want to...
I'm sorry, I don't.
You mentioned you had another comment.
Well, I just have a question. It's kind of related, but I think a little more specific. I'm actually doing a lot of research right now on higher education institute policies that have to deal with sexual misconduct and how that affects the climate of the school. And so I was just wondering where you all thought we are as far as the quality of our policies and how effective they are in not only letting students know what to do if it happens, but how to reach the people that might be potential assailants, and how your policy discourages those people. Because I think the policies are very passive, and nothing is very like accusatory, and I don't want to say intimidating, but there's nothing to say that sexual misconduct is horrible, like you shouldn't do it. It just says what to do if you're a victim.
I mean, I guess I can, speak, I don't know if, I mean, it's very interesting perspective on policies. I guess I'm not as, I don't have a lot of faith that policies can mold behavior that directly, but what the university did was to really significantly revamp all of our both policies and processes, and it was in 2015, I believe, largely in response to some changes that were really happening at the federal level about thinking about sexual misconduct and sexual assault as something that violated Title IX, which was a really different way of thinking about it, and a very strong federal push, under Obama and Biden and the White House around that time to really refocus on policies. So in 2015, we put together very detailed policies that for the first time tried to define for BU what consent meant, and exactly how the process would play out from who were confidential reporters, who were non-confidential. It doesn't include sanctions, and it doesn't include a discussion of what will happen to you, based on the type of conduct. It definitely includes the process of investigation, and the reason we don't include sanctions in it is because we don't know what the sanction is going to be until the whole investigatory process plays out, and a decision is made, and then if it's a faculty member, it moves into a disciplinary process that governs faculty, staff, a separate process, and then students another. And what's been really interesting for me as a lawyer is that, we were very, very worried initially about the lack of universities taking seriously complaints of sexual misconduct and bringing adjudications through to the end, particularly if respondents may be either staff, faculty, or students on campus who might be in a position of power and going forward and expelling them or doing what was necessary. And so there was this real sense that victims' voices hadn't been heard. And if you've been sort of following what's been happening on the national level in the last probably 3 or 4 years, is that many, what we call respondents, the people who are accused, have said the pendulum swung too far, and a lot of university processes are fundamentally unfair to the accused, in that, assumptions were made just based on complaints. And so it's been a very interesting time for universities and their policies to try to figure out how to have processes in place that don't create barriers for victims coming forward, but that also are protective of the rights of people accused. And so while I think everybody agrees that, as in your words, it's horrible, we have to, as the university, be completely neutral until we find out what happened, because in just about all of these cases there is, not always, sometimes people do admit that it happened, but most of the time, as Kim can tell you, we've got someone on the other side saying, I didn't violate the policy, this is what happened, and it's a really different version of events than what the complainant is saying.
Yeah, I agree. I do take your point, though, that a really strong statement by the institution about I don't even know how to say this correctly, but a strong statement about our values with respect to sexual misconduct and what kinds of things are completely unacceptable, and how we think about dealing with those things perhaps might be helpful, as opposed to just a policy statement and information about. I think one of the things we've done really well in this most recent version is the definitions of what sexual misconduct is. And I think that's something that we were missing before.
Yeah.
And I think now it's very specific what exactly kinds of behaviors we're talking about. I think that's been helpful, but I think that I can understand where you're coming from, that you probably would want to see the institution make a very strong statement about our values with respect to that kind of behavior. So I hear.
I think SUNY does that.
Yeah.
They have their policies open with, the SUNY system will not tolerate any form of sexual misconduct.
And I feel like the provost...
State Universities of New York.
Yeah.
I think the provost
Has said that repeatedly,
Yes.
over and over, and absolutely deeply believes that. I don't know, it sounds like provost messages aren't read, but I think really in any time something has gone out from the provost to the community, it starts with, a very strong statement that, sexual misconduct is, not tolerated on this campus and is antithetical to everything, that we are about. But
so possibly we include that in our policy somewhere,
Yeah.
at the beginning of our policy, perhaps make that statement,
Yeah.
so that people who are looking at the policy and haven't read the provost letters would see that that statement.
So, from the perspective of an investigator and a trainer, we've been getting a lot of requests for training in the Equal Opportunity Office from departments throughout the university for department-specific training as a follow-up to the online training. And we meet with them in advance of our follow-on small group training to understand what are some of the specific issues that they're dealing with and want us to address. One of the things that I'm very excited about is that we've proposed
that departments develop on a departmental level community norms where people come together. Chemistry is doing this now. Students, faculty, and employees to work out an aspirational statement of how they want to be together, how they want to communicate with each other, what their values are. And the buy-in, I think, on a smaller level, and an acknowledgement that every department is different. Every department is different, and every department has different needs for ways to implement a sexual misconduct policy. But I think that working at the smaller levels, at the departmental level, the section level, it brings home in small groups and elicits questions and really good discussion about what are we talking about. So we get away from using words like sexual harassment, which is an umbrella term, and we get into what is abuse of power, what is a betrayal of trust, how does it work in this situation, how can we empower you to stand up and let us know. I have to say, I want to put a plug in for SARP. We've been getting more and more complaints, and more people are coming to us with a SARP counselor. And that is huge. And I just mean huge. The other thing that we're putting in a plug for when we do training is the Terrier Connect program, where student health trains people, responsible employees, to be gatekeepers, to pass on the distressed student to the appropriate office or person who can help them. So the more that I think that we publicize what we can do on a one-on-one or departmental basis, I think the stronger our community will be.
I agree, and that raises a good question for me to our student government representative. Is that something that maybe a group of us could do with your student government to develop some ways to communicate through your governing body that bring us in partnership to figure out how to best reach out to groups of students? And we are doing it with academic departments, so there's no reason we couldn't do it with student groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you saw the impact of the 10-10-10 event last spring, that was the event where student government, for I think it was 10 minutes, on a day, they had different stations across campus where students could stop and sign a letter to our representatives when it was the time when the Title IX legislation was changing, and that had a great response rate. So I think if we're using more efforts like that out in the community, getting students engaged, like saying, come to this training on this day, engaging with student groups, like frats and sororities and athletics. I know you do all the trainings with the Susie Boo trainings with all the athletic teams. I think interacting with students one-on-one, like I would love to sit through one of those trainings and tell you like if it's actually teaching students you know, how to step in if there's a bystander situation and things like that. I think it's definitely a great collaboration. I'm absolutely here for it.
That's great.
I'm surprised Ashley hasn't invited you.
Yeah.
Just so nice.
Okay, ask her next week. While we're on the training, I don't think there are many graduate students here, but hi. Next, we've developed, we piloted it in January, a training specifically for graduates as PhD students. It's called Interrupt, and it's really focuses on the power differentials that graduate students face, especially PhD students, and how the abuse of that, how to step in when you notice any type of sexual misconduct or even lower levels of inappropriate behavior. So if you look on our website, we should have it up. I think it's next Wednesday or Thursday night. And that's just for any graduate student who wants to come. And hopefully we have other graduate students who want to do it by department.
And that's bu.edu/SARP, SARP.
bd.edu/SHS/SARP.
There we go.
SARP.
One more time.
My Boston accent. But I think if you do bu.edu/SARP, it still takes you to the new website.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Mark. I'm one of the co-exec chairs for the Biomedical Engineering Grad Student Council. And I was wondering, I just read the BU Today article in the summary, so this is deeper in the report. Please let me know. Wondering about looking at substance rates of drinking, heavy intoxication related to sexual assault, sexual misconduct. If there's like correlations that the survey took a look at that to see like the differential, when people are heavily drunk or whatever, and kind of the results there. I just didn't see any of that in the executive summary of the BU Today article.
It's a good point. And I honestly can't recall if that, I don't think it was. And also we know that alcohol is the most used drug to incapacitate someone. And I think that one of the kind of the fine lines that we've always walked at SARP is is being really careful not to victim blame in terms of substance use. So I don't think there were any questions about it. If you're
from the little bit of reading that I do, I just know that one of the things that has changed is the binge drinking rates on campus in the last 20, 30 years, right? Those have dramatically gone up. Not perfectly mapping to campus sexual assault rates, but implicated in one of the possible causatives there. So just wondering if the survey is able to get at that at all, and if that's kind of on your all's radar for one of the things that, again, not like a causative sole victim blaming thing, but as something that's part of this picture.
I think that gets into some of the risk reduction things that people do. We don't really do a lot of risk reduction at SARP. It's a lot more prevention.
I think the survey anticipated that was very much connected with sexual assault. That they asked questions about two different types of sexual contact. One that was non-consensual because of physical force, and the other was because of the inability to consent or stop what was happening. And the way that was defined was incidents that happened when you were unable to consent or stop what was happening because you were passed out, asleep, or incapacitated due to drugs or alcohol. And so I think the thinking is that people responding to the survey who said that the assault was due to their inability to consent or stop what was happening, that the assumption is in many of those situations it was because of drugs or alcohol. And there was a fairly high response, to that inability to consent. So.
Let's take a few more. We could get you out so we can study.
I'm sick, so I'll just try to yell.
Well, I'll use another microphone.
Okay, sure, thanks.
Just
Hi, Ryan Thurston, Lab Coordinator at COM. Just to piggyback off of that, in your experience, so maybe it's not necessarily borne out in the survey, in your experience, is there a lesser chance or a lack of reporting due to alcohol or drug use? Do you find that there's people feel ashamed or they feel that it was their fault, that they are less likely to come forward? And Kim, you and I have gone over these things where someone's in my office and they say, so I was out at a party, I was very drunk, something happened, they don't necessarily want to get into it, they know I'm a mandatory reporter, and, or at least do you have advice on how to help people who are in that kind of a situation? And, you know, I always refer them to SARC or to behavioral medicine or to the chaplains when I can, but very often it just feels like there's no way through for some of those students. Do you have any advice on that, or do you?
I mean,
do
I
you
think
feel
the
it's-
university's policy is that if you have been drinking and you're underage, and there's a Good Samaritan policy, and I know SARB talks about this at incoming student orientation, that if you assist somebody or if you need some type of assistance and you've been drinking or using a drug that isn't legal, then that's not what the focus is. That you're not going to get in trouble. The focus is that you get whatever you need to be okay. And I know we talk about that with incoming students. I know wellness and prevention focuses a lot on the Good Samaritan policy. And I can't remember if we changed the name to it or not, but that's what I still think of it as. Thank you.
Can I just take that?
Yeah.
Use this
I don't
one.
want anybody to say.
If you use this one, use this one.
Now you're both going to get it. So, with respect to risky behavior, I think we all need to really understand social media, maybe better than some of us do. And there's a lot of attractive nuisance social apps out there that students get involved in that are very risky.
And would you tell people what you mean by
Okay, so for example,
the nuisance?
There's something called something arrangements for sugar daddies and sugar babies. And there are college students who take advantage of the arrangements that are offered through these apps, and they may get into trouble, and they may feel very ashamed that they did this and don't want to be perceived as a sex worker or someone who brought shame to their family, and may not want to come forward. And I think the concept of risky behavior and not blaming anyone for engaging in it and simply dealing with the after effects of whatever occurred is very important, that we not have any sort of victim blaming, shaming. The other thing I just wonder is, as an older person who relies on email, but understands that younger people don't, and that may not be the best way to reach them.
And just one other point of reference, Ryan mentioned the chaplains, behavioral medicine, SARP. They are confidential places. You can report something confidentially at those folk, and they are not required to report it in to the university.
Hello, I'm Maddie. I'm with Kelsey here. We actually are both part of the Every Voice Coalition, or organization is lobbying for every school in Massachusetts to have to take this climate survey. So we're currently pushing the chairman and other politicians to sign on those bills. We definitely want to reiterate that definitely student involvement is completely key. We had a letter writing event. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, we had a letter writing event, and it was actually so amazing, seeing who was willing to come out, a lot of people. So I think, something to consider, like what was said earlier, students are the most powerful tool in talking about this. And I think it's important to consider student focus groups when talking about legislation school-wide.
Yeah, I mean, we had Boston 25 News came and interviewed us because of this, and we had over we would have gotten over 100 letters in less than an hour of just tabling, because we just asked students as they're passing by, do you want to write a letter? Is it important to you? And the students passing by overwhelmingly said yes. Even students that were busy were like, oh, one person who was busy said, hand me the letter and give me the address and I'll sign it when I get home so I can send it later, because it was so important to students.
Yeah, so I think the bottom line is that students really want to participate in this. And I think that the administration should consider, inviting us into more conversations around this.
Definitely agree. I also wanted to bring up the point that the political climate could be having an impact on this issue, definitely a lot. I know I've heard students in some of my classes and other things mention the Kavanaugh hearings, and the way that went, there is a climate of, people who report these things, they're wrong. Because of the way that the survey, because of the whole way the whole thing went. So because of the political climate, that's going to impact things as well, and maybe that should be factored into how we talk about the issue. And I wanted to say that when he was talking about how this is a Boston issue, I think it's broader than a Boston issue. It's a generational issue. It's an American issue, because I think when I talk to my male peers about this, most of them don't understand that it's even the terminology. I mean, I talked to a guy before who basically described how he was raped and didn't even understand that it was rape, because it's just not a thing that is talked about in male communities. And I think among women, the culture is, it's a thing that happens, so you don't have to report it, because you just, as long as it's not a reoccurring issue, you just, you get away from the person who did it. I talked to a person the other day, I was doing a school project, I had to interview someone on what transportation method they use, totally irrelevant to this issue. And they said, I don't take the T, I take the B bus, because I experienced stroking 2 times on the T. It's the thing that you avoid where it happens, you avoid the person who did it, you avoid the places where it happens, and you don't talk about it, you don't report it, because everyone knows it's happening, so it must not be a big deal, it must not be worthy of bringing up.
So 2 quick things. We do test these surveys with students, and we do send them out to students. We also, there's some students who do sit on some of our policy-making bodies through this thing called the University Council. So we do try to get that in there. The hard part about BU is always scale. It's always trying to get enough, just a little bit more. I would urge you, if you can, send me an email. That way I can keep you on the list, and that way we can pull you into some of these conversations and discussions. How about a couple more? If there are a couple more.
I'll just announce why Chair Buchanan. And I just want to second what Eleanor said, because I think that the departments can be very helpful here. To begin with, we really know how to get the attention of our students. And we don't do it by email mostly. So think about using the departments. And secondly, because of the cultures in each of the departments, I think attacking them separately might be really helpful. And so we've taken advantage of these training opportunities and some of the other workshops. And it's a community building as well. So I love the idea, which I've written down, to develop our own statement about it as a department. So thank you, that's really fantastic.
Any final words?
I think another interesting thing that was assessed in the survey was how students felt connected to the campus. And they don't, which is very unfortunate. It's 22% feel very or extremely connected to the campus. And I wonder what we're doing to increase that connection and having more representation on campus. I know definitely the SARP office is very diverse, but behavioral medicine, on the other hand, barely has any clinicians of color. What we're doing, I'm not sure about what judicial affairs looks like or what the office of the council looks like, but what are we doing about making sure that students feel represented and see people that look like them that are going to be making these decisions about the issues. They're going to be connecting with them and giving them resources.
There's this other interesting thing too in that survey, and that is the bystander information. People acting as bystanders, as I think Erica mentioned it, it's pretty high. And so I wonder how that all shapes in. I too worry about the connection piece, because people who are connected to each other, and by the way, I think it's got to be about connecting to each other in those social outlets, those social ways. People who are connected to each other don't rape each other. People connected to each other look after each other. And so I do worry about that. And again, that's why I go back to, it's got to be a broader conversation beyond just the walls of Boston University. And you're right, in the nation, of course. But it is one of those things to think about as the institutional connection. again, not so much to Boston University per se, but to each other. I think that's got to be a really important piece, and how do we do more and more of that as a piece of it as well. So there was that really unusual sort of thing that I saw as well.
Do we have any type of like cultural competency training for like professors on this campus? Should.
Yeah.
Well,
I think we do.
so, right, the Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion has been, throughout really, you know, I guess maybe 2 years that she's been here, Krista Williams has sponsored a number of trainings with outside trainers. They're not mandatory, but they have been open full-day trainings, partial trainings that I think, you know, certainly I've been to and other folks have been to, which are true participatory trainings with sort of exercises and small group conversations. You know, it's, I think it's a process. Again, it's really hard to make things mandatory here, and so sometimes you do get people participating who are not necessarily the people who you would most want to participate, but people who already have an interest. But it's absolutely a core part of what Associate Provost Williams does, and particularly is focused on faculty, but she's also reached out to staff.
And especially, and she also does things that relate to bias as it relates to the hiring process with faculty as well.
And you mentioned that it's hard to make things mandatory. What are the different things that you see, you know, blocking making things mandatory? Because I think the issue here is that so many initiatives that are happening are very passive. Nothing's really taking an extreme initiative to like stop this. Like, I just wish we were taking more real initiative to have mandatory trainings for professors and faculty and staff, trainings for students that you can't mute, trainings that are actually giving that message. You're sitting there, like, I know there's so many technologies. For one of my neuro classes, the exam software that we use, I think it's called ExamSoft, literally locks our computer and we can't do anything else. So why aren't we using things like that to do these trainings and make sure that students are actively engaged with them, and faculty as well?
I'm gonna say one thing about faculty. I don't know about you, but I can't make faculty do anything. I'm not one to go to any faculty member and tell them what they have to do.
But who is?
I'm joking.
I think, you know, I would, I think doing things at a departmental level, so, you know, there are thousands of faculty members in 17 schools and colleges, and for, you know, at the provostial level, the first mandatory training we have ever required of all faculty is the EverFi Sexual Misconduct Prevention Training, which is going to have actual teeth in terms of whether they're eligible for merit increases, which is huge. But to do that, you need something that you can scale, you know, like online training, you know, which I think we all agree is not nearly as good as the departmental individual training that Eleanor was talking about. So I do think it would be great to also have sort of, you know, more general anti-bias training and sort of, you know, cultural competency training. Boy, I don't know. I think within departments, and again, I look back to Chair White, you can mandate, you know, you can mandate things within a department. So.
And I think that's
also more
that's
peer
part of being an
pressure.
adult,
There's peer pressure.
in my mind. My life is full of required things. Like, I'm required to register my car. I'm required to pay when I get on the T. I'm required that's just, to me, part of being an adult. Every year, this is my example that I use, because I'm part of Student Health Services, I have to take an online training and an in-person training about bloodborne pathogens. As a social worker, to me, there's two things I do. I don't touch it and I call somebody. But, you know, part of what I've signed on for is this responsibility to know a little bit more about it. I absolutely agree with you that some things have to be required.
I think just another thought, I was actually earlier talking to a women's studies professor about this. And just another thought for you, maybe it would be good to consider changing policies so that there's less mandated reporters, especially with RAs. Because I feel like sometimes SARC feels like this big, menacing thing that you have to go to yourself. And sometimes, like, it would reach, sometimes people just want to talk to people, like, without it being reported. And I think after you're assaulted, you just need, like, you need to reclaim your life back and you need a friend. And you need to
people
talk to
don't
people.
report to us.
Right.
We're therapists.
No, yeah,
Okay,
but I'm
all right.
saying sometimes it's hard to go to start as therapy. Sometimes it's better to talk to like an RA. And the fact that they're a mandated reporter it's harder to talk to them.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe you could consider that as well.
That's always been my going with this, the law, consider the guide, consider everything
Yeah.
else. I really hope we could get to more of a, that sounds crazy, but a student-directed reporting. So let the student direct you to report if that's what you want. I'm just not sure the feds, and I'm just not sure that there's a lot of stuff for that. You know? But I hear you. I mean, a lot of our policies, this can't help we're talking about being students. So many of our policies and so much of our law is about discouraging people from reporting. And I'm not sure we've done a lot to fix that. And I also think that our current government in Washington is going to make that worse. That's kind of what we're talking. Dean of students will say something entirely different.
Well, I think one of the things that doesn't really get addressed, and I've been much more conscious over the past 2 years to tack this on whenever anybody talks about reporting, is what happens when someone like Ryan does fill out a Title IX form. The student receives, depending on the information, the student receives an email from either Kim or Dale Robbins that says, basically, I've been made aware that you've discussed, the potential that you experience sexual misconduct. There's an invitation for the student to contact either Kim or Dale's office, and then a really long list of resources. So, and I've never been aware, and I'm sure that things happen that I'm not aware of, that either the Office of Judicial Affairs or the Equal Opportunity Office investigators have proceeded in an investigation without the cooperation of the student.
We don't.
Mm-hmm.
There are very limited circumstances in which we must, and one of those circumstances is if this is a person who has been accused before and we're seeing a pattern, and we believe that others are at risk.
The community is
so
at risk.
we're going to have to. We don't tell the student they have to proceed. We tell the student that we have to proceed, and they can be involved or not be involved at whatever level they want to do. That the other is if it's a university employee. Obviously, if we're aware that a university employee has sexually assaulted or otherwise engaged in sexual misconduct toward one of our students, we really worry about that. But again, we engage the student in figuring out how that's going to work, what we're going to disclose, whether there's a way to address the problem without disclosing the person's identity. So, that's a very careful conversation that we have with students and also employees who come forward with sexual misconduct or sexual harassment issues. So it's not a process where once it's reported, we get the guns and wagons out and go marauding down to find somebody. It's not at all. We like to have the student, the complainant, have control in how that works and what it does. And mostly, except for those exceptions, if the student says, I do not want to be identified, I do not want to proceed, we don't.
So it's highly coordinated,
Yeah.
as you can see.
I mean, I just wanted to back up. Kelsey, is that?
Yeah.
I just wanted to back up. I think what you were saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that sometimes when this has happened to someone, they just want to talk to someone and they feel that they have a connection with me or with somebody else in this room and we're all mandatory reporters, that they can't just sit down and collect themselves and if it's an RA. In particular, someone that they feel is in close proximity to them if it's just happened, or that there's no safety net there. That it's like, oh, well, you can talk to me, but, remember that I'll have to report this at town line office. Go and talk to SART, or go and talk to someone that you're less familiar with, most likely, than to talk to someone who has to do a mandatory report. And I know for a fact that students who would like to confide in me say that they don't, or they haven't, because they know that I have to then report that, and that breaks my heart. And I always say, well, I hope that you're talking to someone that you trust, that you can confide in this. You don't have to make a decision right away. Do I want to move forward with the investigation? It's already traumatizing. This can just do it further. So I just wanted to, sorry, I just want to get back up what you were saying, and I feel that on the other end too, that there's a lot of pressure to not say something right away.
There is, and one of the language switch-ups that I recommend is not to say I have to report it, but to say I need to share this with the title line coordinator, because we need to make sure that you get the resources and the help that you may need. You don't have to accept it, but we want to make you aware. So there are ways to say that make the idea less intimidating, but at the bottom line, you're absolutely right. People know that you're going to have to share it with somebody, and it chills them talking to you.
And she'll be the only one I'm sharing this with.
Yeah.
I'm Laura Nichols from College of Communication. I work with Ryan. And just to go back to a previous thread, you were talking, the woman in front of you was talking about the intercultural competence. So I'm thinking about educating the university community at a greater level and how to do that and how to incentivize people to be peer educators, both at the student level, at the staff level, maybe even among faculty. And I know that Terrier e-Development, through the HR website, they have a number of a lot of different training sessions. Is there a way to incentivize people to create, can university administration create a badging process where you get a badge, you can put it on your resume, you can put it on your LinkedIn profile, etc., where you are certified in peer directing a SARP education training. I don't have a concept for this in my head, but I'm just trying to put that out there as because there is all the mandatory training, but how can we elevate that in a way that it doesn't feel so compulsory? You must do X, Y, and Z. You can do it in a way that incentivizes people to want to be part of the solution in educating their peers. And maybe carrying that after, becoming an educator after their time at BU. That's just sort of my thought for
Great idea.
Well, maybe that's something to be shared with Crystal Williams with respect to the kinds of programs she was developing. Maybe there's a possibility for her to work in concert with the e-development.
With DLI, Christelle Rackus and those folks.
Yeah.
That's a good point. We should talk some more.
Okay.
Sorry, this is just going back a little bit. You had mentioned that sanctions aren't listed in the policies because they're kind of subjective. You don't really know what they will be. My high school had a zero tolerance policy for academic dishonesty. It didn't matter how much you cheated, how important the assignment was. If you cheated, you were expelled. What's the probability that there could be something that's a zero tolerance policy for sexual misconduct that's affiliated with BU?
That's an interesting question, and Kevin, maybe you and I can both speak to that. The range of sexual misconduct is really, really broad. So could we say definitively that if we truly had evidence that you raped someone, that you're going to be expelled? Yes.
Yes.
There are certain things that are well defined and well understood. But the reality is that these behaviors are so different and so broad, and some of them are so big, and some of them are so small, and some of them, there are many different kinds of behaviors involved. We can say a range of sanctions, but that's not helpful because it's everything from, for example, for students, a warning letter or probation up to expulsion. And each of those decisions has to be made based on the particulars of that case. So it's really hard to say, in the case of sexual misconduct, you will be expelled or you might get a warning letter. That doesn't tell anybody anything. So I hear what you're saying, and maybe we can talk more about whether there are certain things like rape that we could define, that we can say definitively this is the result, and maybe we should give that some thought. But I don't see being able to do that for the whole range of behaviors.
And there's some things that circumstances that we haven't seen yet, and
Yeah.
we'll need to be able to. Erica mentioned too, there's this other notion to it where we've also got to be fair to the person who's accused of it as well, because maybe they won't be held responsible.
Right.
And so we get from those folks that, well, look, I was already, the minute I walked in the door, you found me responsible, and so I face nothing but expulsion, and I'm really stressed out now about that. So we're trying to find that balance. Kim Randall, Dale Robbins, and I, we meet once a week, and we go through all of these things to make sure that we've got some different opinions about what the prospect might be about sanctioning, if it's necessary. It's not always necessary, and how to do it. And then we also get people who are involved in the process who don't necessarily want us to go that route, and we try once again to listen to the students who are involved with this too. But I agree with Kim for something like, yes, if we find that you've raped someone, I can be pretty unequivocal about that. You won't be here. You'll be expelled. We'll call the police. We do all those sorts of things. I feel pretty unequivocal. There's a lot of other stuff too. That's a part of it as well.
This come up, and Kim, you and I have talked about this, but the reputation about the investigatory process, when I talk to students, it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
When students say, what happens next, and I they say, well, nothing's going to happen. They don't believe anything's going to happen. And I think that means that students just don't want to move forward, or that plays a role in that. What would you all say, and Ken, you too, to try to raise students' spirits about that? Because I know it's prevented students from trying to get justice in their cases in the past. So I'm just wondering what advice you have for students, or what you can say to help them feel more comfortable with that process.
So there's this unfortunate thing here. I am not sure this is a process that lends itself to justice. All people involved in these processes are not happy with the outcome. We have a set of procedures, and that's really what we're doing. We're finding violations, and we're following procedures, and we're saying, here's what the outcome is. I think, this is personal now, I think there's just got to be a different way. We have a system where people are just not going to find justice. I'm also here to tell you too, there are plenty of students who will tell you, we follow through on these. We investigate every inch of it. We're incredibly thorough about it, and we do follow through, and we let them know that. And the investigative process is not great for anybody. No one wants to be under investigation, cooperating with an investigation. I would say in your life, if you can avoid being a part of an investigation in any way, you want that. You don't want to be a part of an investigation, so it is rather unpleasant. But I am here to tell you, and I guess you just got to trust me on this, every year there are any number of investigations that we do, and there are students out there who will tell you, oh yeah, they investigated it. And not only they investigated, they gave me the opportunity to have other people investigate it and look into it. I could appeal to another authority as a part of it, and I also could back out of it when I wanted to as well. So I think that's what I would say, is that it is most unfortunate that I don't think that this is a process about justice. Our procedures are not that. Neither do I think court processes is either, by the way. And what's more, I've got the stats to show you any number of people who have been through an investigative process and where we have come to some resolution on that.
I think the other difficulty with this is that we are restrained from telling the community what the result is of any particular investigation. So we can tell the complainant or anyone impacted by the behavior what we have done that impacts them directly, but we can't share other kinds of things because those are private for our students and our employees. So for example, if someone accuses someone of stalking, we can tell that person after the process is over that we have banned that person from campus, or we have, in some cases, separated them from the residences, or made them stay away from certain buildings on campus. We can tell them those pieces, but if we put that student on deferred suspension, for example, we can't share that. There are things that we just can't share with respect to what our sanctions are. So that makes it very difficult for students who aren't central to an investigation to understand that in fact, yes, something did happen, because we can't tell them what it was that happened. So I think that's part of the problem too.
And I think one of the two pieces of legislature that are up, transparency around the outcomes of any type of judicial investigation or Title IX investigation is part of that, in terms of being across the state. And I know some states do that, require that, but it's easier to require public schools to do that than a private institution. It would take the legislation here to do that.
To wonder what the impact of FERPA would be on that too, though.
In the aggregate and numbers, it's not
Oh,
individuals.
numbers,
Yeah,
not
it's
individuals,
numbers,
okay,
yeah.
yeah.
It's not publishing like individual names or anything like that, but it's, and I think they changed it. Initially, it was monthly to report out transparency in terms of how many students have made a Title IX complaint, and I just thought that was too close. So I really urged them to do it by, and I can never remember, is biannually, twice a year or once every 2 years, every 6 months. I think would be a lot better than monthly.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being here, folks.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thank you.
sitting. This is difficult. I know it is. If you have any additional comments, feel free to send them to dos@bu.edu, Dean of Students at BU. We'll take those and I'll make sure that folks see them. And if we need to, we'll get the appropriate folks to respond to you as well. Appreciate you coming out. Don't get blown away out there. Be well. And thank you all for doing this.